The sun was setting behind the nursing home's faded pink walls as Martha adjusted her best blue dress, the one she'd saved for this day, her 80th birthday. For years, she'd imagined it. Her children laughing around a cake, her husband squeezing her hand like he used to. But now, the clock ticked past 6 p.m. The empty chair across from her yawned wider with every passing minute. The nurse peeked in. Still waiting, Mrs. Wilkins? Martha's fingers trembled around her teacup. They'll come. She forced a smile. Jason promised. But the voicemail from her daughter echoed in her head. Mom, something came up. Her gaze drifted to the framed photo on the table. Her family at the beach 20 years ago, back when they wanted to be near her. Now, she was just background noise. The cake's frosting had started to crack, just like her hope. Then, the door creaked open. Her heart leapt. Was it? A stranger walked in, holding a clipboard. Ma'am, we need to discuss your medication schedule. Martha's throat tightened. So this was it. No calls. No apologies. Just silence. She stared at the untouched cake. The single candle melted into wax. Years of waiting. For nothing. Martha sat frozen in her chair, the clipboard still in the stranger's hand. The nurse gave her a pitying glance before slipping out of the room, leaving her alone with the weight of her disappointment. The silence was suffocating. She reached for her teacup again, but her hand shook so badly that the china clattered against the saucer. The sound echoed in the empty room, a sharp reminder how hollow her celebration had turned out. She closed her eyes and let out a slow breath, trying to steady herself. For the moment she did, memories rushed in, flashes of birthdays passed, and the house was full of laughter, and the table was crowded with loved ones, back when she was needed, back when she was wanted. A sharp knock at the door startled. Her heart leapt again, maybe this time, but it was just Carla, the young aide who always brought her evening pills. Carla's cheerful demeanor faltered when she saw the untouched cake, the single wilted balloon tied to the chair. Oh, Mrs. Wilkins, she murmured, setting a small paper cup of medication on the table. Martha didn't even look at it. They didn't come, did they? Carla asked softly. Martha's lips pressed into a thin line. She didn't trust herself to speak. The truth was too heavy to say out loud. Carla hesitated, then sat down across from her. You know, my grandma used to say that sometimes people get so caught up in their own lives that they forget to look back. Martha let out a bitter chuckle. Forget? They didn't forget Carla. They chose not to come. The words tasted like ash in her mouth. She had spent years making excuses for them. Jason's job is demanding. Sarah's kids keep her busy. David's always been forgetful. But today, there were no excuses left. Then Carla did something unexpected. She reached into her pocket and pulled out an envelope. This came for you earlier. I was supposed to give it to you after dinner, but she trailed off, sliding across the table. Martha stared at it. The handwriting was her son David's, messy, rushed, just like him. Her fingers trembled as she tore it open. Inside was a single sheet of paper, but it wasn't a birthday card. It was a legal document. Her breath hitched as she scanned the words. Petition for guardianship. The room spun. What? She read it again, slower this time, her heart pounding so hard she could hear in her ears. According to the papers, her children were petitioning to declare her incompetent, to take control of her finances, her home, her life. The date stamped at the top? Today. A cold numbness spread through her chest. This was why they hadn't come. Not because they were busy. Not because they forgot. Because they were waiting for the court's decision. Carla's voice was distant, worried. Mrs. Wilkins? Are you okay? Martha didn't answer. Her hands clenched around the paper, crumpling the edges. All these years, she had told herself they were just distracted, just careless. But now she saw the truth. They weren't coming because they didn't need her anymore. They just needed what she had left. And then, the door opened again. Martha's head snapped up as the door creaked open, her heart pounding so violently she thought it might burst from her chest. The crumpled guardianship papers slipped from her fingers, fluttering to the floor like a dead leaf. For one wild, irrational second, she imagined it might be Jason. Maybe he'd come to explain, to apologize, to tell her this was all some terrible mistake. But the figure standing in the doorway wasn't her husband. It wasn't any of her children. The man was a stranger, tall with salt and pepper hair, wearing a worn leather jacket that looked decades out of style. His eyes locked onto hers with an intensity that made the breath catch in her throat. You're Martha Wilkins? His voice was rough, like gravel underfoot. When she didn't answer, he stepped fully into the room, and that's when she noticed what he was holding, not a clipboard or paperwork, but a faded photograph. He placed it gently on the table in front of her, right beside the ruined birthday cake. The image was old, the edges yellow with age, but Martha recognized herself immediately, younger, happier, standing between two people she hadn't seen in over 40 years. Her hands began to shake. "Where did you get this?" The words came out barely above a whisper. "The man, who was he?" Pulled out the chair across from her and sat down slowly, as if giving her time to object. When she didn't, he leaned forward, his expression unreadable. "My name is Daniel," he said. "Daniel Reeves. I think you knew my mother." He tapped the photograph, his finger resting on the face of a smiling woman with fiery red hair, a woman Martha had tried desperately to forget. The room tilted. Martha's vision blurred at the edges. Lillian. Just the sight of her sent a flood of memories crashing through Martha's mind, memories she'd buried so deep she'd almost convinced herself they weren't real. The summer of 1978, the whispered arguments, the terrible choice she'd made, the lies she'd carried ever since. Her mouth went dry. I don't understand," she stammered, but even her own ears, the denial sounded weak. Daniel's gaze never wavered. "She told me everything before she died. About the baby. About you." Martha felt the blood drain from her face. The baby. The word hit her like a physical blow. For 42 years, she'd carried this secret, locked it away in the darkest corner of her heart. She'd thought it would die with her. But now, here it was, staring her in the face. Her pulse roared in her ears. This couldn't be happening. Not today. Not now. Across the table, Daniel reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small, folded piece of paper. "She wrote you a letter," he said quietly. "Never sent it. I found it when I was cleaning out her things." He slid it toward her, but Martha couldn't bring herself to touch it. The weight of what it might contain terrified her. A sudden, hysterical thought struck her. Is this why my family abandoned me? Did they find out? But no, that was impossible. She'd been so careful. Only 2 other people had ever known, and both were gone. Weren't they? Daniel exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair. "Look, I didn't come here to upset you, but after Mom died, I started digging. Found out about the guardianship petition your kids filed." His jaw tightened. "I thought you should know. It's not just about your money. There's a developer who's been buying up properties on this block. Your house is the last one they need." Martha recoiled as if struck. The house. The home she'd lived in for 53 years. The place where she'd raised her children. Where she'd buried her husband. They weren't just trying to control her. They were trying to erase her. The realization was a knife to the gut. And then, as if the universe hadn't thrown enough at her in one evening, Daniel dropped his final bombshell. "There's something else," he said, his voice dropping so low she had to lean in to hear. "About the baby. He didn't die, Martha. My mother lied to you." The world stopped. Somewhere in the distance, a clock was ticking. The scent of stale cake hung heavy in the air. Martha's entire body went numb. He didn't die. The words echoed in her skull, meaningless and earth-shattering all at once. She opened her mouth, but no sound came out. Daniel's expression softened. "His name is..." The door burst open. The sudden slam of the door against the wall made Martha jump so violently that her elbow knocked over the teacup, sending dark liquid spreading across the table like a bloodstain. Standing in the doorway, breathing heavily as if he'd run there, was her son David, his tie loosened, his expensive suit wrinkled, his face flushed with either anger or guilt. She couldn't tell which. His eyes darted from her to Daniel and back again, his expression hardening when he saw the photograph still lying between them. "What the hell is going on here?" His voice was too loud for the small room, bouncing off the walls like gunshots. Martha opened her mouth, but Daniel spoke first, his voice calm but edged with steel. "We were just having a conversation." He didn't stand up, didn't back down, just held David's glare without blinking. The tension between them was so thick Martha could almost touch it. David strode forward and snatched up the photograph, his fingers crumpling the edges. "Where did you get this?" he demanded, shaking it at Daniel. Then his gaze dropped to the image, and Martha saw the exact moment recognition dawn. His face went pale, his lips parting slightly. He knew. Oh God, he knew. Her stomach twisted into knots. Daniel slowly rose to his feet. "Your mother has a right to know the truth." "The truth?" David let out a harsh laugh that held no humor. "You have no idea what you're messing with." He turned to Martha, and for the first time, she saw real fear in her son's eyes. "Mom, this guy's a con artist. He's been preying on elderly. Stop. The word tore from Martha's throat, raw and desperate. She pushed herself up from the chair, her legs trembling, but holding. I'm tired of the lies, David. All of them. Her voice gained strength as she spoke. Decades of suppressed anger bubbling to the surface. First the guardianship papers. Now this. How long have you known? David's jaw worked silently for a moment before he deflated, his shoulders slumping. Not until last year, he admitted quietly. When Dad was being executed, the lawyer found discrepancies. Records of payments to some woman in Ohio going back to the 80s. His eyes flicked to Daniel with something like hatred. Her, I assume. He jerked his chin at the red-haired woman in the photograph. Martha felt the room spin. Jason had known. Her dead husband had known about the payments, had made the payments, and never said a word. How many other secrets had he taken to the grave? Daniel crossed his arms. Those payments were child support, he said flatly, for your brother. The silence that followed was deafening. Martha watched as David's face cycled through shock, denial, and finally, a dawning horror. That's impossible, he whispered, but the conviction in his voice was gone. Martha reached out blindly, gripping the edge of the table for support. Her mind raced, pieces of the past slotting together with terrible clarity. The summer she'd spent with her cousin Lillian after college. The illness she'd supposedly had that kept her bedridden for months. The sudden move to another state. Her parents' hushed conversations that stopped whenever she entered the room. Oh God, it hadn't been an illness at all. Daniel pulled another photo from his wallet. This one a dark-haired man in his 40s, smiling beside an older version of Lillian. Michael, he said softly, placing it next to first. He's a mechanic in Dayton. Has 3 kids. Never knew why his Aunt Martha sent checks every month but never visited. Martha's knees gave out. She would have collapsed if David hadn't caught her, lowering her gently back into the chair. His hands were shaking as badly as hers. For a long moment, no one spoke. The weight of the revelation hung heavy in the air, suffocating. Then David did something unexpected. He knelt beside her chair, his voice breaking. Mom, why didn't you ever tell us? The question shattered what little composure she had left. Tears spilled down her cheeks as she cupped her son's face, seeing him, really seeing him, for the first time in years. I was ashamed, she admitted hoarsely. And then there never seemed to be a right time. Daniel cleared his throat. There's more. He hesitated, glancing at David before continuing. Michael doesn't know any of this, but he's been having health issues, needs a kidney donor. When I started tracing his medical history, that's how I found you. Martha's breath caught. A brother her children never knew existed. A son she believed dead for 40 years. And now he needed her. The irony wasn't lost on her. After being discarded by the family she'd raised, she might be the only hope for the one she'd given up. Just as she opened her mouth to respond, a nurse burst into the room, her face flushed with urgency. Mrs. Wilkins, you need to come quickly. It's your daughter. She's in the lobby and she's terrified. She says someone's been following her. Martha's body moved before her mind could process the nurse's words, her chair screeching against the floor as she surged to her feet with energy she hadn't possessed in years. David caught her arm to steady her, but she barely noticed, her entire being focused on one terrifying thought. Sarah was in danger. The daughter who hadn't bothered to call on her birthday was now here, frightened, and Martha's maternal instincts overrode every other emotion. She stumbled toward the door, Daniel and David close behind, the revelations about Michael momentarily forgotten in the face of this new crisis. The nursing home lobby was chaos. Sarah stood near the reception desk, her designer coat askew, her usually perfect blonde hair disheveled. When she saw Martha, her face crumpled with relief, then immediately twisted back into panic. Mom, thank God, you have to listen to me. Her words came in frantic bursts as she grabbed Martha's shoulders. I think they're watching the house. The phone calls. The cars that follow me. I didn't know where else to go. Martha's heart pounded as she took in her daughter's shaking hands, the wild look in her eyes. This wasn't just paranoia. Sarah had always been the level-headed one, the corporate lawyer who laughed at horror movies. Seeing her like this sent a chill down Martha's spine. Who's following you? Why? Before Sarah could answer, David stepped forward, his voice tight. It's about the guardianship, isn't it? Sarah's gaze snapped to her brother, then to Daniel, her eyes narrowing in suspicion. Who's this? Daniel raised his hands in a placating gesture. Friend of the family. Martha barely registered the exchange. Her mind was racing, connecting dots she hadn't seen before. Sarah, she said slowly, what exactly is in the house that someone wants so badly? The question hung in the air. Sarah and David exchanged a glance, a silent communication between siblings that spoke volumes. Martha saw the guilt flash across their faces before they could mask it. Her stomach dropped. They knew something. Sarah took a deep breath. After Dad died, he left documents in the safe behind his old desk. I didn't think anything of it until a sudden crash from the parking lot cut her off. Tires squealed. Someone shouted. Through the lobby windows, Martha saw headlights swing wildly as a dark SUV peeled away. Daniel was at the window in 3 strides. Black Tahoe. No plates. His voice was grim. David pulled out his phone, his fingers flying across the screen. I'm calling security. But Martha was watching Sarah, who had gone deathly pale. They followed me here, she whispered. Then her eyes widened. Oh God, the kids. I left them with the nanny. Daniel grabbed his keys. Address? Now. As Sarah rattled off her home address, Martha's mind reeled. This wasn't just about property development or secret child. There was something bigger at play, something her late husband had hidden. The pieces were there, just out of reach. Jason had always been meticulous about paperwork, obsessive even. What could he have left that was worth terrorizing their family over? David ended his call and turned to them, his face ashen. Security found a man lurking near the east entrance. He took off when confronted, but not before they saw what he was holding. He swallowed hard. A syringe. The air left Martha's lungs. Someone hadn't just been following Sarah. They'd been coming for her. The guardianship petition, the surveillance, now this? It was all connected, and the realization hit her like a physical blow. They weren't trying to control her life. They were trying to end it. Sarah's phone chose that moment to ring. The screen flashed unknown caller. With trembling fingers, she answered, putting it on speaker. A distorted voice filled the lobby. You should have signed the papers, Mrs. Wilkins. Now everyone you love will pay. The line went dead. The parking lot's flickering sodium lights cast long shadows across Sarah's face as she slammed her car door shut, the sound unnaturally loud in the tense silence. Martha sat stiffly in the passenger seat, her knuckles white against the armrest, every bump in the road sending a fresh jolt of pain through her arthritic joints. In the back seat, Daniel kept his eyes locked on the side mirror, watching for the black SUV that had vanished into the night. David had stayed behind at the nursing home. Someone needed to coordinate with security and the police. He'd insisted, though Martha suspected he just couldn't meet her eyes after the revelations about Michael. Sarah took a sharp turn onto Elm Street, nearly clipping a parked delivery truck. The safe's behind Dad's old Yale diploma. She muttered, more to herself than anyone else. He showed me once when I was home from law school. Just in case, he said. Her voice cracked on the last word. Martha stared out at the darkened houses flashing by. Jason had always been a man of routines and rituals. Sunday crossword puzzles, Wednesday golf games, the same brand of bourbon every Christmas. But this? Hidden documents? Threats in the night? The husband she'd shared a bed with for 43 years might as well have been a stranger. Daniel leaned forward, his breath warm against Martha's ear. Whatever's in that safe, it's connected to the property developers. Has to be. His voice was low, urgent. They wouldn't be this desperate otherwise. Sarah's hands tightened on the wheel. That's what I realized last week. When I started digging into guardianship paperwork, I found shell companies, layers of them, all leading back to... A pair of headlights flared in the rearview mirror. Daniel swore under his breath. Same SUV. They picked us up again. Sarah's foot slammed the accelerator. The car lurched forward, throwing Martha back against the seat. Trees and mailboxes blurred past as they careened through the suburban streets. Somewhere behind them, a car horn blared. Sarah slowed down. Martha gasped, "Can't." Sarah took another turn without braking, the tires screeching in protest. If they get to the house first. The rest of her sentence was cut off by a deafening bang. Martha screamed as the rear window exploded inward, showering them with glass. Daniel yanked her down just as another shot rang out, burying itself in a headrest where she'd been sitting seconds before. "They're shooting at us." Sarah shrieked. Daniel's voice was eerily calm. Next left, then immediate right into the alley. Somehow, Sarah managed to maneuver, the car bouncing violently over potholes as they plunged into narrow service road behind the old movie theater. The SUV overshot the turn, its brake lights flaring red in the darkness. They didn't wait to see if it would come back. 3 minutes later, Sarah skidded to a stop in her own driveway, the car's front bumper kissing the garage door. The house loomed before them, dark, silent, and suddenly ominous. Daniel was out first, scanning the street. "Go," Now, Martha moved like a woman half her age, her body fueled by pure adrenaline. Sarah fumbled with the keys at the front door, her hands shaking so badly she dropped them twice. When the lock finally clicked, they burst inside, Daniel immediately closing and bolting the door behind them. The familiar scent of lemon polish and old books wrapped around Martha, a scent that should have meant safety, but now felt like a lie. Every shadow seemed to hold new menace. Sarah didn't bother with lights. She led them straight to Jason's study, the room untouched since his death 2 years prior. Martha's breath caught at the sight of his favorite leather chair, the indentation in the armrest where he'd always rested his whiskey glass. The Yale diploma came off the wall with surprising ease. Behind it, embedded in the plaster, was a small, modern safe with a biometric scanner. Sarah pressed her thumb against it. Nothing happened. Shit. She tried again. Dad must have reset it after showing me. Martha stepped forward without thinking. Her thumb, wrinkled with age, looked absurdly small against the sleek technology. The scanner beeped. A green light flashed. The safe door swung open. Inside lay a single manila folder and a small USB drive. Sarah snatched the folder, her eyes scanning the top document rapidly. Then her face went slack with horror. Oh my God. Martha took the papers from her daughter's limp hands. The first page was a property deed. For their home, yes, but also for the entire block. The second page froze the blood in her veins. A signed agreement transferring ownership to something called Blackthorn Holdings upon her death or declared incompetence. The signature at the bottom was unmistakably Jason's. But it was the third document that made Martha's legs give out. A life insurance policy for $5 million, with her children as beneficiaries. Daniel caught her before she hit the floor. His voice was barely audible as he read over her shoulder. They weren't just after the property. They were waiting for you to die. Somewhere outside, a car door slammed. The sharp rap of knuckles against the front door echoed through the silent house like gunfire. Martha's entire body locked in terror, the damning insurance policy slipping from her fingers to scatter across her late husband's study floor. Daniel moved first. In one fluid motion, he snatched the USB drive from the safe, shoved it deep into his pocket, and pressed a finger to his lips. Sarah stood frozen, her face a mass of conflicting emotions as she stared at the life insurance document with her name printed boldly as a beneficiary. The knocking came again, louder this time, followed by a voice that sent a jolt through Martha's system. Sarah? Mrs. Wilkins? It's Detective Bryson, County Police. We need to speak with you immediately about the incident at the nursing home. Martha's breath caught. That voice. She knew that voice. Daniel's hand clamped onto her wrist, his grip almost painful. Don't, he mouthed silently, his eyes burning with warning. Sarah, however, was already moving toward the hallway. We called security, not the police, she murmured over her shoulder, her lawyer's instincts kicking in. How would they even know we're here? The knocking turned to pounding. Open up. This is a matter of life and death. Martha's pulse roared in her ears as fragmented memories surfaced. Jason coming home late from golf games, smelling a cigar smoke, and a particular cologne she could never place. The same scent now seemed to seep under the study door. Her mouth went dry. That's not a detective, she whispered. Daniel didn't ask how she knew. He simply reacted, yanking open the study's rear window and ushering them toward it just as the front door's lock gave way with a sickening crunch. Heavy footsteps thudded through the house. Sarah hesitated, her gaze darting between the hallway and the window, years of legal training warring with raw survival instinct. Sarah, now, Martha hissed, the command leaving her lips with maternal authority she hadn't used in decades. They tumbled out into the moonlit backyard just as the study door burst open behind them. Martha's knees screamed in protest as she hit the damp grass, but Daniel was already pulling her up, dragging them both toward a gap in a hedge that separated Sarah's property from the neighbors. A man's furious shout followed them, then the unmistakable click of a gun's safety being disengaged. Sarah's backyard swimming pool glowed in eerie blue under the security lights as they skirted its edge. Martha's mind raced. Where could they go? The police station? The nursing home? Every option seemed impossibly far as her breath came in ragged gasps. Then Daniel veered left toward the old gardener's shed tucked against the property line. He wrenched the door open, shoving them inside before following and closing it silently behind them. The cramped space smelled of fertilizer and gasoline, barely large enough for the three of them to stand shoulder to shoulder. Through the shed's grimy window, they watched as two figures emerged from the house, one tall and broad-shouldered in what was clearly a police uniform, the other slight and familiar enough to make Martha's heart stop. David, Her son stood illuminated by the patio lights, his face twisted in an expression she'd never seen before. Not anger, not fear, but something far worse. Cold calculation. He spoke quickly to the fake detective, gesturing toward the hedges. The uniformed man nodded and pulled a gun from his holster. Sarah made a choke sound beside her. Oh God, David's part of this. Martha wanted to deny it, to defend her child as she always had, but the evidence was undeniable. The guardianship papers, the life insurance policy, the way he'd stayed behind at the nursing home, not to help, but to delay them. Her vision blurred with tears she refused to let fall. Daniel's breath was warm against her ear. Listen carefully, he whispered. That USB drive is the key to everything. Your husband hid it because it proves the whole scheme. Blackthorn Holdings isn't just some development company. It's a front for her. A shadow fell across the shed window. All three of them froze as the fake detective's face appeared inches from the glass, his breath fogging the pane. The beam of his flashlight began sweeping the shed's interior. Martha pressed back against the wall, praying the stacked bags of mulch would hide them. The light inched closer, closer. Then, a shrill ringtone shattered the tension. The man's phone. He stepped away to answer it, his voice fading as he moved back toward the house. Daniel didn't waste a second. He cracked the shed door open just enough to see David and the imposter deep in conversation near the pool. We'll never make it to the car, he murmured, but I saw a bike in the neighbor's yard. Martha, can you ride? Before she could answer, Sarah grabbed her arm. Mom, look. David was holding something small and rectangular, a phone, but not his own. Even from this distance, Martha recognized the cracked pink case. Sarah's backup phone, the one she kept charging in the kitchen. As they watched, David tapped the screen, then held it to his ear. A second later, Sarah's purse began vibrating against her hip. The effect was instantaneous. Both men's heads snapped toward the shed. David's voice carried across the lawn, calm and deadly. Come out, Mom. Let's talk about this like adults. The flashlight beam swung back toward them. There was nowhere left to run. The shed door flew open with a force that sent gardening tools clattering to the floor, the sudden flood of artificial light from the backyard spotlights blinding Martha momentarily. She blinked rapidly, her aged eyes struggling to adjust as the hulking silhouette of the fake detective filled the doorway, his service weapon glinting in one hand. Behind him, David stood perfectly composed, Sarah's pink phone still dangling from his fingers like some grotesque trophy. The contrast between her sons, David in his tailored suit, every hair in place, and Daniel with his worn leather jacket and calloused hands, struck Martha with painful clarity. Two men, two lives, two versions of the truth she'd never allowed herself to see. Mom. David sighed, the word dripping with condescension. Did you really think running would solve anything? He stepped forward, his polished loafers crunching on the shed's concrete floor. The smell of his cologne, something expensive and musky, overpowered the earthy sense of fertilizer and grass seed. It was the same scent she caught whiffs of for years whenever Jason returned from his supposed golf outings. The realization hit her like a physical blow. Her husband and son had been working together long before Jason's death. Daniel shifted slightly, positioning himself between Martha and the gun. You're making a mistake, he said, his voice low and steady. That USB has everything. Bank records, shell company trails, even the autopsy report they falsified for Lillian. David's smirk faltered for just an instant before he recovered. And yet here you are, trapped in a garden shed. He held out his free hand. Give it to me, and maybe I convince Mr. Kovac here not to put a bullet in your skull. The fake detective, Kovac, grinned, revealing a gold-capped molar. Martha's stomach turned. She'd seen that smile before in the nightmares that plagued her after Jason's death. Dreams she dismissed as grief playing tricks on her mind. Sarah, who had been trembling silently beside her, suddenly found her voice. You killed Dad, she whispered, the words not a question but an accusation. David's laugh was short and humorless. Don't be dramatic. The pancreatic cancer did that all on its own. He adjusted his cufflinks, a nervous habit Martha recognized from his childhood. Though I will admit certain treatments might have accelerated things once we realized he was having second thoughts. The shed's walls seemed to close in around Martha. 43 years of marriage, 2 children, a lifetime of compromises and quiet sacrifices, all reduced to this moment. Standing in a tool shed while her son casually admitted to murder. Her voice, when it came, surprised her with its steadiness. The guardianship papers, the life insurance. This was never about the house, was it? For the first time, genuine emotion flickered across David's face. Of course it was about the house. Do Do you have any idea what this property is worth to the right people? He gestured wildly toward the window. The underground mineral rights alone. Kovac cleared his throat pointedly. David caught himself, straightening his tie with a sharp tug. But you're right, Mom. It's about more than that. It's about legacy. About finally getting what our family deserves after generations of scraping by. His gaze flicked to Daniel with undisguised contempt. Something your bastard son would never understand. The words hung in the air like smoke. Martha felt Daniel stiffen beside her, but it was Sarah who reacted first. You knew. She whirled on Martha, betrayal flashing in her eyes. You knew about Michael this whole time? Martha opened her mouth, but no sound came out. How could she explain 40 years of shame and regret in this grimy shed with a gun pointed at them? The truth was complicated. A tangled mess of family expectations and the desperate choices young women make. Daniel broke the silence. Michael doesn't want your money, David. He never did. He reached slowly into his pocket, withdrawing the USB drive. But he did want the truth about what happened to his mother. Kovac raised his gun. Enough talking. A sudden crash from the house made everyone jump. Glass shattered. An alarm began blaring. Kovac spun toward the noise, giving Daniel the split second he needed. He lunged, driving his shoulder into the bigger man's midsection. They went down hard, the gun skittering across the floor. David scrambled for it, but Sarah was faster. She snatched up a rusted garden hoe and swung it like a baseball bat, catching her brother square in the ribs. He went down with a grunt, his breath coming in wheezing gasps. Martha stood frozen, watching her children, the lawyer and the schemer, the daughter who'd always followed rules now swinging a weapon, the son who'd been groomed for greatness groveling on a dirty floor. Somewhere outside, sirens wailed. Daniel had Kovac pinned, but the bigger man was thrashing wildly. The USB drive lay forgotten near Martha's feet. She bent slowly, her joints protesting, and picked it up. The plastic casing was warm from Daniel's pocket. In that moment, she understood with perfect clarity what Jason had been trying to tell her in the only way he knew how, through paperwork in hidden compartments and secrets within secrets. The truth wasn't in this USB drive or the insurance policies or even in David's betrayal. The truth was in the choices she made next. As the first police cruiser skidded to a stop in Sarah's driveway, its lights painting the shed and pulsing blue and red, Martha slipped the USB into her bra. Let them think they'd won. Let them chase paper trails and shell companies. Some truths were too precious to be stored on a flash drive. The police floodlights turned the backyard into a surreal stage, every blade of grass casting long, dramatic shadows as officers swarmed the property. Martha watched numbly as Kovac was dragged away in handcuffs, the man's gold-capped tooth glinting as he shouted threats in a language she didn't recognize. David sat handcuffed on the patio steps, his Armani suit now wrinkled and grass-stained, his lawyer's voice calmly invoking his rights to the arresting officers. But Martha's attention was fixed on the USB drive burning a hole against her skin where she'd hidden it. This small piece of plastic that held the power to unravel everything. Detective Alvarez, a weary-looking woman with sharp eyes, guided Martha to a patio chair while paramedics checked her vitals. Mrs. Wilkins, she said gently, your daughter says you have evidence? Sarah, standing nearby with a blanket wrapped around her shoulders, shot Martha a pleading look. The USB was her leverage now, the only thing keeping them safe from whatever networks David and Kovac had built. But Martha hesitated. She'd spent a lifetime keeping secrets. First Lillian's, then Jason's, now this. The weight of all those untold truths pressed down on her chest like a physical burden. Daniel, who'd been giving a statement to another officer, suddenly appeared at her side. His knuckles were bruised from the fight, his jacket torn at the shoulder. Ma'am, he said to the detective, his voice carefully neutral. Maybe this isn't the best place to discuss sensitive information. Alvarez's gaze flicked between them, understanding dawning. Of course, we can continue at the station. No, Martha's voice surprised even herself. She stood slowly, gripping the patio table for support. There's something I need to see first. The detective frowned. Mrs. Wilkins, with all due respect. My husband's study, Martha pressed, before anyone else goes through it. A silent communication passed between Alvarez and the senior officer. Finally, the detective nodded. 5 minutes. An officer goes with you. The study looked different now under the harsh glow of police flashlights. The one sanctified space where Jason had spent his evenings, now just a crime scene. Martha went straight to the bookshelf, her fingers trailing over leather-bound volumes until she found the false spine Jason had shown her years ago during a drunken Christmas party, laughing at officer's spy novel fantasy. The compartment behind it yielded a small key. The watching officer raised his radio as Martha crossed to Jason's desk. "Ma'am, I need you to." "It's here," she interrupted, inserting the key into a nearly invisible lock on the desk's underside. A hidden drawer slid open with a soft click. Inside lay a single item, an old flip phone, the kind drug dealers use in movies. Daniel inhaled sharply. "That's your mother's," Martha finished quietly. She powered it on, the ancient device taking forever to boot up. When it did, there was only one contact in the address book, Blackthorn. The last received call was dated the night Jason died. Martha's hand shook as she opened the text message inbox. The most recent thread contained just 3 words sent 12 hours before Jason's final hospitalization. "Terminate the arrangement." The reply, received 37 minutes later. "Understood. Asset will be handled." Daniel made a strangled noise in his throat. Sarah's hands flew to her mouth. Even a police officer looked unsettled. Martha felt the world tilt around her. All these years she blamed the cancer, blamed God, blamed fate, never suspecting that Jason's last moment of agony might have been purchased, that their entire marriage, their family, their lives had been nothing more than lines on a balance sheet. The USB drive in her bra suddenly felt heavier. What other horrors did it contain? What other betrayals had Jason documented before his conscience got the better of him? Detective Alvarez appeared in the doorway, her face grim. "Mrs. Wilkins, we've just gotten a call from a nursing home. Your medical records show someone's been altering your medication logs for months." She hesitated. "And there's more. The DA wants to discuss immunity for your testimony against Blackthorn Holdings." Immunity. The word hung in the air like a guillotine blade. Because Martha knew, with sudden clarity, that the trail wouldn't stop with David or Kovac, or even the faceless executives at Blackthorn. It led straight to Michael, her firstborn, the son she'd abandoned, the one person who had every reason to want revenge. And as the detective kept talking, Martha made her choice. She reached into her bra, withdrew the USB drive, and in one fluid motion, snapped it in half. The broken pieces of the USB drive clattered onto Jason's desk like falling teeth. The sound impossibly loud in the stunned silence that followed. Detective Alvarez's mouth opened and closed twice before any words came out, her professional composure cracking under the weight of Martha's unexpected sabotage. Sarah made a strangled noise in her throat, her lawyer's mind immediately grasping the consequences of evidence destruction, while Daniel simply stared at Martha with dawning understanding. She was protecting someone, and there was only one person left who warranted that kind of sacrifice. Alvarez recovered first, her voice tight with controlled fury. "Mrs. Wilkins, do you have any idea what you just done? That was key evidence in a murder investigation." Martha met her gaze steadily, her hands no longer shaking. For the first time in years, perhaps for the first time since she'd handed her newborn son to Lillian all those decades ago, she felt completely certain. "My husband kept secrets from everyone," she said quietly, "even from me. But some truths aren't yours to uncover, detective." The detective's radio crackled to life with a burst of static, followed by an urgent voice. "All units, be advised, we have a 10 to 78 at the nursing home. Possible hostage situation. Suspect is armed and demanding to speak with Mrs. Wilkins." Every head in the room snapped toward Martha. Her heart stuttered, then began pounding so violently she could feel it in her temples. There was only one person who would be looking for her there. Daniel was already moving, grabbing Martha's elbow with surprising gentleness. "We need to go. Now." Alvarez blocked their path. "Like hell you do. That's an active crime scene and Mrs. Wilkins just destroyed." "My brother's there," Daniel interrupted, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "The one they've been trying to silence for 40 years. The one who is proof of everything Blackthorn's done." He locked eyes with the detective. "You want your real puppet master? He's waiting at that nursing home." A tense silence stretched between them. Somewhere outside, a car engine roared to life. David being taken to the station, Martha presumed. The flicker of the police lights through the window painted Alvarez's face in alternating flashes of red and blue, her internal battle playing out across her features. Finally, she stepped aside. "You ride with me," she told Martha. "And if this goes sideways, I never had this conversation." The nursing home looked like a war zone when they arrived. SWAT vehicles angled haphazardly across the parking lot, their floodlights turning night into garish day. An officer hurried to meet them, his face slick with sweat. "Suspects in room 217, Mrs. Wilkins' room. He's got 2 nurses and a resident in there with him. Demands to speak to Martha or he starts shooting." Martha's knees nearly gave out. This wasn't the reunion she'd imagined. Not that she'd ever allowed herself to imagine it at all. The son she thought dead, the child she'd mourned in secret, was here, now, waiting for her with a gun and a lifetime of rage. Alvarez handed her a bulletproof vest. We'll have sniper's position, but you're going in first. Stall him. Get those hostages out. Daniel caught Martha's arm as she adjusted the heavy vest. He doesn't know, he murmured, low enough that only she could hear. Michael thinks you willingly gave him up. Lillian never told him the truth. The words hit like a punch to the gut. All these years, her son had believed she'd abandoned him, just as her other children had abandoned her. The symmetry was almost poetic in its cruelty. The walk down the nursing home hallway felt endless, each step echoing ominously against the linoleum. Martha could hear muffled sobs coming from behind closed doors, residents terrified by the commotion. As they approached room 217, Alvarez gave her a final nod and peeled off to join the tactical team, leaving Martha to face the door alone. She took a deep, shuddering breath and knocked. The voice that answered was deep, rough with emotion, and so painfully familiar it stole her breath. Come in, Mom. We have a lot to talk about. Martha turned the knob, her hand steady for the first time all night. The room was dim, lit only by the flickering television. Michael stood near her abandoned birthday cake, his broad shoulders blocking most of the light. He wasn't what she'd expected. Not the angry young man of her nightmares, but a weary-looking middle-aged father with Lillian's fiery hair gone mostly gray. The gun in his hand was trained not on the cowering hostages, but on a man Martha hadn't noticed at first, a silver-haired executive type in a ruined suit, kneeling on the floor with his hands bound. Recognize him? Michael asked, nudging the kneeling man with his foot. Charles Whitmore, CEO of Blackthorn Holdings. The man who gave the order to kill your husband. Whitmore lifted his head. His expensive veneer cracked to reveal the predator beneath. Mrs. Wilkins, he sneered. How lovely to finally meet the woman who birthed such a disappointment. Michael's grip on the gun tightened, but his eyes never left Martha's. I came here tonight to show you what your precious family really is, he said, his voice trembling with decades of pent-up fury. But then I found this. With his free hand, he tossed something onto the bed, a yellowed envelope Martha recognized instantly. The last letter her mother had written before passing, the one she'd hidden in her Bible years ago and forgotten. The seal was broken. Michael's next words shattered her completely. You didn't give me away, did you? They took me. Outside, the SWAT team's muffled commands faded into white noise. The hostages, the gun, even Whitmore's smug presence, all of it disappeared as Martha locked eyes with the son she thought lost forever. Some truths, it seemed, couldn't stay buried, no matter how deep you dug the grave. The envelope on the bed seemed to pulse with its own energy, its faded paper glowing faintly in the dim hospital room light. Martha's fingers twitched at her sides, decades of suppressed maternal instincts warring with the surreal horror of the scene. Her long-lost son holding the CEO at gunpoint while terrified hostages whimpered in the corner. Whitmore's smug expression faltered as he tracked Martha's gaze to the letter, his expensive veneer cracking to reveal something far uglier beneath. That's nothing, he snapped, straining against his bonds. Old woman's ramblings. Michael didn't even glance at him. The gun in his hand remained steady as he kept his eyes locked on Martha, his voice barely above a whisper. Read it. The air left Martha's lungs in a rush as she picked up the envelope. Her mother's elegant handwriting on the front, from Martha, when she's ready to know, sent a chill down her spine. She'd hidden this letter 43 years ago, too afraid of its contents to ever open it. Now, with trembling fingers, she withdrew the single sheet of paper inside. The words blurred at first, her vision swimming with unshed tears. Then they sharpened with cruel clarity. My dearest Martha, if you're reading this, you finally asked the right questions about that summer flu you had in 1978. The baby didn't die, darling. Your father arranged an adoption through his business partners, the same men who now control Jason's company. They took your son as collateral against your future cooperation. I tried to stop them, but the letter ended abruptly, as if her mother had been interrupted mid-confession. Martha's legs gave out, the paper fluttering from her grasp as she collapsed onto the edge of the bed. The room spun around her, memories rearranging themselves with terrible new context. Her father's sudden interest in Jason as a son-in-law, the way her miscarriage had conveniently cleared the path for a respectable marriage, the lifetime of obedient silence that followed. Whitmore let out a harsh laugh. Daddy never told you? He sold your bastard to us for a seat on the board. His smug grin returned as he addressed Michael. And you, our little insurance policy. We would have left you rotting in Ohio if you hadn't started poking around where you didn't belong." One of the hostage nurses gasped as Michael's finger tightened on the trigger. Martha saw the murder in his eyes, the decades of being lied to, used as leverage, treated as a dirty secret rather than a human being. She moved without thinking, crossing the room in 3 shaky steps to place herself between the gun and Whitmore. "Michael, no." Her voice surprised her with its steadiness. "He's not worth it." For a heart-stopping moment, she thought he might shoot anyway. Then his arm slowly lowered, the rage in his eyes giving way to something far more complex. "All these years," he whispered, "I thought you didn't want me." The raw pain in his voice shattered what was left of Martha's composure. She reached for him instinctively, then froze when the door burst open behind her. Police dropped a weapon. SWAT officers flooded the room, their rifles trained on Michael. Alvarez was shouting orders, her focus entirely on the visible threat, the armed man holding hostages. Nobody noticed Whitmore's hand slipping into his jacket. Martha saw. The CEO's bound hands had come loose somehow, and now he was pulling something metallic from his inner pocket. She opened her mouth to scream a warning, but her body moved faster than her voice. The gunshot was deafening in the confined space. Martha didn't feel the bullet at first, just a sudden pressure in her side, like someone had punched her. Then the pain came white-hot and all-consuming, radiating outward from the wound as her knees hit the floor. Chaos erupted around her, more gunfire, screams, the heavy thud of a body collapsing. Strong hands caught her as she toppled sideways, lowering her gently to the ground. Michael's face swam above hers, his mouth moving, but the words not quite reaching her through the ringing in her ears. Somewhere beyond the thickening fog, Martha registered Alvarez kneeling beside Whitmore's lifeless body, retrieving the small derringer he'd pulled. The detective's lips formed a silent curse as she examined the weapon. A single shot fired, the rest still loaded. The realization came to Martha slowly, like dawn breaking through heavy clouds. Whitmore had missed his real target. Michael was unharmed. Darkness crept in at the edges of her vision as paramedics swarmed the room. Someone was applying pressure to her wound, calling out her blood pressure numbers in a tense voice. Michael's hand found hers, his grip almost painfully tight. "Stay with me," he begged, his voice cracking. "Please." Martha wanted to tell him so many things, that she'd look for him, that she'd never stop grieving, that the monthly checks had been her idea even when Jason argued against them. But the words wouldn't come. Instead, as consciousness slipped away, she focused all her remaining strength on squeezing her son's hand. Somewhere beyond the pain, beyond the fear, a strange peace settled over her. After a lifetime of being someone else's pawn, she finally made a choice that mattered. The last thing she saw before the darkness took her was Michael's face, her father's sharp nose, Lillian's fiery hair, and eyes that looked exactly like her own. Consciousness returned to Martha in fractured pieces. The antiseptic sting of hospital air, the rhythmic beeping of machines, the dull ache radiating from her side, where Whitmore's bullet had torn through flesh and muscle. Her eyelids felt impossibly heavy as she struggled to open them, the bright fluorescent lights stinging like physical blows. When her vision finally cleared, the first thing she saw was Michael slumped in a chair beside her bed, his large hands cradling a styrofoam cup of long cold coffee, his head bowed in exhausted sleep. The sight sent a pang through her chest sharper than any bullet wound. This stranger who shared her features, her stubbornness, her capacity for both love and rage. She tried to speak, but her throat was raw from intubation, producing only a dry rasp. The sound was enough to startle Michael awake, his bloodshot eyes snapping open with suddenness that spoke of years spent sleeping lightly, always ready for danger. When he saw her looking back at him, the coffee cup slipped from his fingers, splattering brown droplets across the sterile white floor. "You're awake." His voice was rough with emotion, his hands hovering uncertainly over hers, as if afraid to touch. The doctors weren't sure. The bullet nicked an artery. Martha managed a weak nod, her fingers twitching toward his. The simple movement sent fresh pain radiating through her torso, but she didn't care. Her son was here, alive, and from the looks of the untouched sandwich wrapper and multiple coffee stains, he hadn't left her side since the shooting. The door swung open before she could attempt speech again, revealing Detective Alvarez holding a thick manila folder and an unreadable expression. "Mrs. Wilkins," she said by way of greeting, her sharp eyes flicking between Martha and Michael. "Glad to see you're still with us. You gave everyone quite a scare." Michael stiffened visibly, his shoulders squaring as if preparing for battle. Martha understood why. The last time they'd seen Alvarez, Michael had been holding hostages at gunpoint. But the detective surprised them both by tossing the folder onto the bedside table with a weary sigh. "Whitmore's private files," she explained. recovered from a safe deposit box after his death. Seems our late CEO kept meticulous records of every dirty deal and paid off official. She fixed Michael with a piercing look, including the falsified adoption papers for a certain infant in 1978. Martha's heart stuttered. She tried to sit up, gasping as a movement pulled at her stitches. Michael was there instantly, supporting her with surprising gentleness given his callous hands. Alvarez waited until she was settled before continuing. The short version? Blackthorn Holdings has been using children as leverage for generations. Your father wasn't the first to make that particular deal, Mrs. Wilkins. Just the latest in a long line of powerful men trading their grandchildren for stock options. Her mouth twisted in disgust. We've identified at least 17 other cases going back to the 1950s. The revelation landed like a physical blow. Martha had spent a lifetime blaming herself, believing her youthful indiscretion had set this tragedy in motion. But the truth was far worse. She'd been preyed upon by a system older than she was, one that viewed children as commodities and mothers as obstacles to be managed. Michael made a strangled noise in his throat. So what happens now? Alvarez hesitated, then seemed to come to some internal decision. Officially, you're facing charges for unlawful imprisonment and assault with a deadly weapon. She held up a hand as Michael tensed. Unofficially, the DA's willing to deal. Your testimony could bring down what's left of Blackthorn, including several very powerful people who thought their secrets died with Whitmore. Martha found her voice at last, though it came out cracked and whisper-thin. And David, the detective's expression darkened, facing conspiracy charges. Seems he's been Whitmore's golden boy since college. She shook her head. Your daughter Sarah's cooperating fully. She had no idea how deep the corruption went. A strange mix of grief and relief washed over Martha. She'd lost one son but gained another. The cosmic symmetry of it would have been poetic if it didn't hurt so damn much. Alvarez turned to leave, pausing at the door. Oh, and Mrs. Wilkins? That USB drive you destroyed. A ghost of a smile played at her lips. Turns out your husband made copies. Several, in fact. We recovered one from his golf locker just this morning. The door clicked shut behind her, leaving Martha and Michael alone with their tangled history and uncertain future. Outside the hospital window, the first light of dawn painted the sky in hopeful shades of pink and gold. Michael broke the silence first, his voice barely above a whisper. All those years, I thought you didn't want me. Martha reached for his hand with all the strength she could muster. I never stopped looking, she rasped. Not really. And as the morning sun warmed the sterile hospital room, mother and son began the long, painful process of stitching together the fragments of their broken past. One truth at a time. The hospital room's fluorescent lights hummed like angry bees as Martha struggled to process everything Alvarez had revealed. The pain medication made her thoughts sluggish, but the ache in her chest had nothing to do with the bullet wound. It was a weight of generations of betrayal pressing down on her. Michael sat rigid in his chair, his mechanic's hands clenched into fists so tight his knuckles had gone white. She could practically see the war raging behind his eyes, decades of believing himself unwanted now colliding with the horrifying truth that he'd been stolen, traded like some commodity between powerful men. A soft knock at the door startled them both. Sarah stood hesitantly in the doorway, her usually impeccable appearance disheveled. Hair pulled into a messy ponytail, no makeup, wearing the same blouse from the night of the shooting. Her eyes were red-rimmed and puffy, her gaze flicking nervously between Martha and Michael. Mom, she breathed, the single word carrying an ocean of regret. Martha instinctively reached out, wincing as a movement pulled at her stitches. Sarah crossed the room in 3 quick strides, carefully embracing her. The familiar scent of her daughter's shampoo unleashed a fresh wave of emotion. This child she'd raised, loved, and nearly lost the same corrupt system that had stolen her firstborn. Sarah pulled back first, turning to Michael with an expression Martha couldn't quite decipher. I brought you something. She reached into her oversized purse and withdrew a thick, leather-bound album. Our family photos. I thought maybe you'd want to see. Michael took the album with trembling hands, flipping open the cover to reveal a much younger Martha holding a swaddled infant. David, not him, but the resemblance between the brothers was uncanny. His throat worked as he turned page after page, watching his own face reflected in the children he'd never known were his siblings. Sarah perched on the edge of the bed, her voice barely above a whisper. Dad kept a locked filing cabinet in his office. After the police left last night, I broke into it. She swallowed hard. There were bank statements, Mom, monthly payments to an account in Ohio going back to 1980, and a note. Her breath hitched. It said, for Michael's education. Never stop. Martha's vision blurred with tears. All these years, she believed Jason had resented the payments, had only agreed to them under duress. But he kept sending them, long after Lillian's death, long after any legal obligation had expired. The revelation seemed to hit Michael like a physical blow. He stood abruptly, the photo album slipping from his lap as he paced to the window. The morning sunlight painted his profile in gold, highlighting the tear tracks on his weathered face. All this time, he rasped, "I thought the money was hush payments. Blood money." Sarah surprised them both by crossing to him, laying a tentative hand on his arm. "You have a niece and nephew," she said softly. "Twins. They're 8. A hesitant smile tugged at her lips. "They know all about their Uncle Mike the mechanic who fixes race cars." Michael turned sharply. "You told them about me?" "Of course." Sarah's voice gained strength. "I didn't know the whole story, but I knew you existed. Dad." He'd get this look sometimes when Ohio was mentioned. "I put the pieces together years ago." The hospital door burst open before Martha could process this new revelation. Daniel stood breathless in the doorway, his clothes rumpled, his eyes wild. "They're releasing David," he blurted. "Some fancy lawyer got him out on bail an hour ago." Sarah's face went pale. "That's impossible." "Not impossible. If someone's still pulling strings at Blackthorn made it happen," Daniel interrupted. He turned to Michael, his expression grim. "And that's not the worst part. Your shop in Dayton? It was torched last night. The fire marshal says it was arson." Martha's heart stuttered. This wasn't over. Whatever remnants of Blackthorn remained, whatever powerful figures Whitmore had protected, they were still fighting back, and they knew exactly where to strike. Michael's face hardened into something terrifying. "My kids. Safe," Daniel assured him quickly. "Your wife took them to her sister's in Michigan after the fire." He hesitated, then added, "But they left you a message." Through the detective. From his pocket, he produced a single playing card, the Ace of Spades. Pinned to it was a business card with a single handwritten note. "Endgame, the usual place." Martha didn't need to ask what it meant. The look that passed between Michael and Daniel spoke volumes. This was a challenge from whatever remained of Blackthorn, and they intended to answer it. Sarah surprised them all by squaring her shoulders. "I'm coming with you." Michael shook his head. "Absolutely not." "I'm a corporate lawyer," she interrupted, her voice steel. "I know how these people think, and I owe you both." Her gaze flicked to Martha. "All of you." Martha struggled to sit up, ignoring the pain flaring in her side. "Then I'm coming too." 3 voices answered in unison. "No!" Michael leaned down, pressing a gentle kiss to her forehead, the first physical affection he'd ever shown her. "You've done enough, Mom." The word sent a shockwave through her system. "Let us clean up the mess this time." As they filed out of the hospital room, her children, united at last, Martha knew she should feel afraid. But all she felt was an odd sort of peace. Whatever happened next, the truth was finally out. The lies had stopped. And for the first time in 45 years, her family was whole. The abandoned steel mill loomed against the twilight sky like the skeleton of some long-dead beast, its broken windows glowing orange from the setting sun. Michael killed the engine of Daniel's pickup truck 2 blocks away, the sudden silence pressing around them as all 3 stared at the decaying industrial complex where Blackthorn had apparently chosen to make their last stand. Sarah's fingers trembled slightly as she unbuckled her seatbelt, the only outward sign of the nerves she was otherwise masterfully concealing. Michael admired that about her already, the sister he'd just met, but who carried herself with the same quiet stubbornness he'd seen in Martha during those final moments before she took a bullet meant for him. Daniel checked his pistol with practiced ease before tucking it into his waistband. "Remember," he murmured, "this isn't about revenge. We're here for evidence. Whitmore might be dead, but his files mention a silent partner who called the real shots." Sarah pulled a flash drive from her pocket, the copy of Jason's files Alvarez had given her before they left the hospital. "And we have the only existing list of every child Blackthorn ever trafficked. That's why David was released. Someone powerful wants us destroyed." Michael's jaw tightened as he opened the truck door. The smell of rust and rotting wood flooded in, mixing with the faint chemical tang from the nearby river. Somewhere in that decaying building was the brother who betrayed their mother, the man who'd likely ordered the fire that could have killed Michael's family. The part of him that had spent 40 years nursing abandonment issues wanted to storm and fist flying, but Martha's words echoed in his mind. Violence is what they expect. Be smarter. They approached the overgrown railroad tracks, the tall weeds providing scant cover. The mill's main entrance yawned open, the massive steel doors long, since removed for scrap. Just inside, a single lit cigarette glowed in the shadows. Right on time. David's voice sent an involuntary shudder down Michael's spine. His brother, half-brother. He corrected himself, stepped into the fading light, impeccably dressed in a tailored suit despite the surroundings. The resemblance between them was uncanny. Same strong jaw, same hazel eyes. But where Michael's face showed every hard-earned year, David's had the smooth, pampered look of a man who'd never miss a spa day. Sarah stepped forward before Michael could speak. Where's the silent partner, David? Or were you just the errand boy all along? David's smirk faltered for just an instant. You always did talk too much, sis. He gestured deeper into the building. He's waiting, though I doubt he'll be as forgiving of your betrayal as I am. The walk through the corpse of the steel mill felt like traversing some nightmare funhouse. Rusted machinery loomed in the shadows, their purpose indecipherable after decades of neglect. Pigeons startled from roofs high above, their wings like gunshots in the cavernous space. And always David ahead of them, his expensive shoes crunching on broken glass with infuriating nonchalance. They reached what had once been a factory floor, now empty save for a single chair illuminated by a shaft of dying sunlight. In it sat an elderly man, his spine straight despite his obvious age, his hands resting on an ornate cane with a silver wolf's head. Michael didn't need an introduction. The family resemblance was unmistakable. Grandfather, Sarah breathed, the word equal parts greeting and accusation. Arthur Wilkins didn't stand as they approached. His sharp eyes, the same pale green as Martha's, skimmed over Sarah and Daniel before locking onto Michael with unsettling intensity. So, he said, his voice far stronger than his frail body suggested, the bastard returns. Michael felt the words like a physical blow, but it was Sarah who reacted first. You, she whispered, pieces clearly falling into place. You're the silent partner. You've been pulling Blackthorn strings this whole time. Arthur's chuckle was dry as autumn leaves. Blackthorn was always a Wilkins company. My dear, Whitmore was just the latest in a long line of useful idiots. He turned his cane slowly between his hands. Your father understood that. Piteous conscience got the better of him at the end. The implication hung in the air. Jason's death hadn't been natural after all. Michael saw Sarah sway slightly, watched as Daniel's hand drifted toward his concealed weapon. But Arthur wasn't done. The irony, of course, the old man continued, is that we wouldn't be in this mess if Martha had simply obeyed. The deal was clear. She marries Jason. We take the child. Everyone moves on. His lip curled, but she had to go looking. Had to drag the past into the present. Michael's vision went red at the edges. This withered old monster had orchestrated everything, his stolen childhood. Martha's decades of guilt. Jason's murder. His hands clenched into fists. A gunshot rang out, shockingly loud in an enclosed space. Arthur jerked in his chair, a look of comical surprise crossing his face before he slumped forward, a dark stain spreading across his crisp white shirt. Behind him, David lowered a still-smoking pistol, his expression unreadable. The problem with silent partners, David said calmly, is they tend to talk too much when they get old. Sarah screamed as Arthur toppled to the concrete. Daniel drew his own weapon, but David was already moving, backing toward a shadowed corridor. This ends now, he called. The files disappear, the past stays buried, and we all walk away. Another shot, this one from Daniel's gun, but David had already vanished into the maze of the abandoned mill. The echo of running footsteps faded quickly, leaving only the sound of Arthur's labored breathing and Sarah's panicked sobs. Michael knelt beside the dying old man, unsure why he bothered. Arthur's lips moved weakly, his hand clutching at Michael's sleeve with surprising strength. What he said next would change everything. Arthur Wilkins' breath came in wet, ragged gasp as Michael knelt beside him, the old man's blood soaking through the knees of his jeans with alarming speed. Sarah had rushed forward too, her lawyer instincts warring with decades of granddaughterly affection as she pressed her scarf against the gunshot wound, though the way her hands trembled betrayed that she knew it was futile. The scent of gunpowder and rusted metal mixed unpleasantly with the coppery tang of blood in the air, making Michael's stomach churn as he leaned closer to catch Arthur's whispered words. You look just like her, the old man wheezed, his bony fingers still clutching Michael's sleeve with surprising strength. His eyes, the same pale green as Martha's but clouded with pain now, flickered with something that might have been regret. Lillian, my daughter, your mother. The words hit Michael like a punch to the gut. He'd known Lillian was connected, of course, but this... Sarah made a choked noise beside him, her hands freezing mid-motion. Grandfather, what are you saying? Arthur's laugh turned into a cough, flecks of blood appearing at the corners of his thin lips. The great irony he managed, each word clearly costing him. I took you from Martha, only to lose you to my own rebellious child. His grip tightened momentarily. Lillian was supposed to place you with an approved family. Instead, she kept you, raised you as her own. Michael's vision swam. All these years, the woman he called Mom, the chain-smoking, foul-mouthed mechanic who taught him how to rebuild an engine before he could ride a bike, had been his aunt, his birth mother's sister. The pieces fell into place with dizzying speed. Why Lillian had always been so fiercely protective. Why she drunk herself to sleep every year on May 12th, his birthday. He realized now. Why she'd made him memorize Martha's name and face despite his young age when she'd first shown the photo. She loved you too much, Arthur continued, his voice growing fainter. Just like Martha did. Weakness runs in the family. His breath hitched. David, he understands. The Wilkins legacy must. Daniel, who'd been standing guard at the corridor entrance, suddenly hissed a warning. Someone's coming. The sound of multiple footsteps echoed to the abandoned mill, too heavy and coordinated to be David returning. Michael barely had time to process this new threat before a team of black-clad SWAT officers burst into the open space, weapons drawn in laser sights, painting red dots across all their chests. Hand where we can see them. Sarah reacted first, raising her bloodied hand slowly. I'm an attorney. This man has been shot. We need medical attention immediately. The lead officer, his face obscured by a tactical helmet, barely glanced at Arthur's crumpled form. Arthur Wilkins? At Sarah's nod, he made a sharp gesture to his team. Secure the scene. Detective Alvarez wants everyone detained for questioning. Michael barely resisted as they pulled him to his feet and cuffed his hands behind his back. His mind was still reeling from Arthur's deathbed confession, the world around him moving in surreal slow motion as the officers roughly searched him. One of them pulled the flash drive from his pocket, the one containing all of Blackthorn's darkest secrets, and held it up to the light with apparent disinterest before slipping it into an evidence bag. Sarah was protesting loudly now, citing case numbers and constitutional rights as they dragged her toward the exit. Daniel went quietly, his eyes locking with Michael's in silent communication. This wasn't over. The last thing Michael saw before being marched out was Arthur's lifeless hand, still curled as if clutching at the truth he'd spent a lifetime burying. The old man's final words echoed in his mind, mixing with the phantom scent of Lillian's cigarette smoke and motor oil. The Wilkins legacy must. Must what? Continue? End? The sentence would forever remain unfinished, just like so many lives Arthur had manipulated. As the cold steel of the police transport van closed around him, Michael made a silent vow. Whatever came next, the Wilkins legacy would be what he chose to make of it. Not David's, not Arthur's, his. And for the first time in his life, he knew exactly where to start. The interrogation room smelled of stale coffee and industrial cleaner, the flickering fluorescent light overhead casting harsh shadows across Detective Alvarez's exhausted face. Michael sat motionless in the hard metal chair, his wrists raw from the handcuffs they'd only recently removed, watching as Alvarez paced a small space like a caged animal. The silence between them stretched taut, broken only by the occasional burst of static from the detective's radio and the distant murmur of voices from the precinct bullpen. Alvarez stopped abruptly, slapping both palms down on the scarred metal table between them. "Let me get this straight," she said, her voice dangerously calm. "You're claiming Arthur Wilkins, pillar of the community, philanthropist of the year, was a mastermind behind a multi-generational child trafficking operation, and that his own grandson David just executed him to cover it up." Michael met her gaze without flinching. "You saw the body." "I saw an old man shot in an abandoned building with 3 people standing over him," Alvarez shot back, one of whom happens to be a disgruntled long-lost son with a history of violence. The barb stung, but Michael kept his expression neutral. He'd spent 40 years being called worse. "Check the flash drive," he said evenly. "Everything's there, bank records, property deeds, adoption papers, all with Arthur's fingerprints all over them." Alvarez's jaw tightened. She pushed off the table and walked to the two-way mirror, her reflection ghostly in the glass. "That's the problem," she said quietly. "The drive your sister gave us? It's blank." The words landed like a physical blow. Michael's mind raced. Sarah wouldn't have lied, which meant someone had switched the drives. David? The SWAT team? His stomach turned as he remembered the officer casually bagging the evidence without even glancing at it. Before he could respond, the interrogation room door burst open. A young officer leaned in, his face pale. "Detective, you need to see this." Alvarez followed him out, leaving Michael alone with his churning thoughts. The blank drive changed everything. Without proof, their entire story sounded like the deranged conspiracy theories of a bitter family torn apart by greed and mental illness. He closed his eyes, seeing Martha's face as she lay in a hospital bed, her quiet strength, her determination to finally set things right after a lifetime of being manipulated. He couldn't fail her now. The door opened again, but it wasn't Alvarez who entered. Daniel slipped inside, moving with the quiet efficiency of a man who'd spent years avoiding attention. He held up a hand before Michael could speak, pressing a finger to his lips as he crossed the table. When he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "They're scrambling out there. Just got word from a contact at the coroner's office. Arthur had a second bullet in him." Michael frowned. "What?" "Different caliber than David's gun," Daniel continued, his eyes darting to the mirror. "Alvarez knows something's off, but her captain's breathing down her neck to wrap this up as a family dispute gone wrong." He leaned closer. "Here's the thing, Sarah made copies too. Gave one to me before we left the hospital." He patted his chest where the outline of a flash drive was just visible beneath his shirt. "But we can't trust anyone in this precinct." The implications settled over Michael like a lead weight. If even the police were compromised, where did that leave them? His thoughts were interrupted by Ray's voices in the hallway, Alvarez arguing with someone, her tone sharp with barely contained fury. Daniel took advantage of the distraction to press something cold and metallic into Michael's hand, a handcuff key. "When I give the signal, be ready to move." Michael palmed the key, his pulse kicking up. What signal? As if on cue, the precinct's fire alarm blared to life, the piercing shriek accompanied by flashing lights and the sudden chaos of officers evacuating. Daniel yanked open the door to reveal a hallway already filling with smoke from what appeared to be a trash fire near the evidence room. Now, they moved together, Daniel leading the way through the chaos with the confidence of someone who'd navigated worse situations. Michael kept his head down, the key burning a hole in his palm as they pushed through confused officers and into a back stairwell. The smoke was thinner here, the air cooler. "Sarah?" Michael asked as they descended. "Already out," Daniel assured him. "She's with Martha. We're meeting at the safe house." He threw a grim look over his shoulder. "But we've got another problem. David's not running scared like we thought. He's gathering what's left of Blackthorn's board right now at the family estate." Michael's steps faltered. "The estate?" "Where Martha grew up." Daniel nodded grimly. "Where it all began. He's calling some kind of emergency vote, probably to liquidate assets before the truth comes out." They burst out into a rear parking lot where Daniel's battered pickup waited, its engine already running. As Michael climbed in, his mind raced ahead to what awaited them at the Wilkins estate. David, whatever remained of Blackthorn's leadership, and the ghosts of generations of secrets. But this time, Michael realized with grim determination, they wouldn't be walking into the lion's den unprepared. This time, they had the truth on their side, and Martha Wilkins waiting in the wings. The Wilkins family estate loomed at the end of the winding driveway like something from a Gothic novel. 3 stories of weathered gray stone covered in ivy that seemed to pulse in the intermittent moonlight as clouds scud across the night sky. Michael killed the headlights half a mile out, letting Daniel's pickup roll to a silent stop behind a screen of overgrown boxwoods. The air smelled of impending rain and freshly turned earth from the gardens Martha had once tended as a young bride, though the flower beds now lay fallow and choked with weeds. Sarah was waiting for them at the predetermined meeting spot, an old gardener's shed that had miraculously escaped the estate's general decay. She emerged from the shadows as they approached, her face pale but determined in the dim glow of her phone screen. "Mom's safe at the cabin," she whispered without preamble. "But we've got problems." David's called an emergency session of the Blackthorn board. They're voting tonight to dissolve the company and distribute assets. Daniel cursed softly. That'll scatter the money across a dozen offshore accounts before anyone can freeze it. Michael peered through the rusted gaps in the shed's corrugated metal siding toward the main house. Every window on the first floor blazed with light, and the circular driveway was packed with luxury cars. "How many are we talking?" 12 board members plus David, Sarah said. "Mostly old money types who think they're here for a routine investment vote." She hesitated. "But 3 are Arthur's contemporaries. They know exactly what Blackthorn really is." A cold drizzle began to fall as they formulated their plan. Sarah would enter through the front door, her status as both a Wilkins and corporate lawyer, granting her unquestioned access. Daniel and Michael would take the service entrance, using knowledge Martha had provided about the house's layout to reach the study, where the meeting was being held. The walk across the overgrown lawn felt like moving through a dream. Michael's boots sank slightly into the damp earth with each step, the sensation triggering a bizarre sense of deja vu. Had he played here as a child during some long-buried visit? The idea that his entire life had been shaped within these walls by people who never intended for him to exist sent a fresh wave of anger coursing through his veins. They reached the kitchen entrance unnoticed, the staff long since dismissed for the evening. The air inside smelled of lemon polish and something richer, prime rib and expensive red wine being served to men who thought themselves untouchable. Voices echoed down the hallway, growing clearer as they crept forward. Extraordinary circumstances demand extraordinary measures, David was saying, his polished courtroom voice carrying easily. With my grandfather's unfortunate passing, the Wilkins family shares must be redistributed immediately to prevent. Sarah's voice cut through smoothly. Prevent what, David? The truth from coming out. Michael and Daniel exchanged a glance and quickened their pace. They reached the study doorway, just as chaos erupted inside. The scene before them was something out of surreal painting. 12 well-dressed men and women frozen, in various states of shock, half risen from their leather chairs around the massive mahogany conference table. David stood at the head, his usually impeccable appearance slightly disheveled, a crystal tumbler of amber liquor clutched in one white-knuckled hand. Sarah faced him from the opposite end, her posture radiating calm authority despite the tension in the room. It was one of the older board members who broke the stalemate. Wallace Gantry, a silver-haired industrialist in his late 70s, rose shakily to his feet. This is highly inappropriate, Sarah. These matters involve child trafficking, Sarah snapped, slapping a thick folder onto the table. Generations of it, and every person in this room is complicit. David's laugh was hollow. Dramatic as always, sister, but you have no proof. Daniel chose that moment to step into the room, Michael at his side. Actually, he said, holding up the flash drive, we got all the proof we need right here. Bank records, property transfers, even a few interesting autopsy reports. The effect was instantaneous. 3 of the older board members went sheet white. A woman Michael recognized from Forbes magazine, covers quietly pushed back on the table, as if to leave. David's composure cracked. Security, he bellowed, slamming his glass down so hard it shattered. But no one came. Sarah smiled coldly. I took the liberty of dismissing them, told them the family needed privacy. She turned to address the room. Here's what's going to happen. Everyone in this room is going to sign sworn affidavits detailing their knowledge of Blackthorn's activities. In return, they'll receive limited immunity for cooperating with the investigation. Murmurs of protest erupted, but Sarah continued over them. Or we release everything to the press tonight and let the court sort out. Her gaze locked onto David. Your choice. For a long moment, the only sound was the ticking of the antique grandfather clock in the corner. Then, to Michael's shock, David began to laugh, a deep, genuine sound that set the hair on his arm standing upright. Oh, Sarah, he said, wiping mock tears from his eyes. You always did think like a lawyer. He reached into his breast pocket and withdrew a small silver remote. But you forget, this house has been in our family for generations, and grandfather believed in contingencies. He pressed a button. Somewhere deep in the house, an alarm began to wail. The wailing alarm seemed to pulse through the very walls of the old house, a shrill, mechanical scream that set Michael's teeth on edge. For a heartbeat, the assembled board members remained frozen in tableau. Wallace Gantry half risen from his chair, his liver-spotted hands gripping the edge of the conference table. The Forbes-listed woman caught mid-retreat toward the door, David standing triumphant at the head of the table, the silver remote glinting in his hand like some perverse trophy. Then chaos erupted as the first tendrils of smoke began curling under the study doors. Daniel reacted first, lunging across the room to wrench open the heavy drapes covering floor-to-ceiling windows. Fire escape, he barked, shattering the glass with an antique brass bookend. The night air rushed in, carrying with it the acrid scent of burning wood, and something more chemical, gasoline, Michael realized with dawning horror. Arthur hadn't just wired the house with alarms. He'd rigged it to burn. Sarah grabbed the nearest board member, a portly man in his 60s who seemed on the verge of cardiac arrest, and shoved him toward the window. Move. All of you. Most complied in panicked silence, but David remained motionless, his expression eerily calm as the room filled with smoke. You still don't understand, he said, raising his voice over growing roar flames elsewhere in the house. This was always the end game. No witnesses, no evidence, just ashes. Michael crossed the room in 3 strides, grabbing his brother by the lapels. The heat was intensifying rapidly, sweat already soaking through his shirt. Were the originals? He demanded. The real adoption papers? The photos? David smiled then, a ghastly expression in the flickering orange light, where you'll never find them. A thunderous crash from somewhere above sent plaster dust raining down on them. The fire was moving faster than Michael would have thought possible, eating through the old dry timber like paper. Daniel appeared at his side, dragging him backward. "We have to go, now." Michael resisted for only a second longer before releasing David. "Come with us," he said, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. David adjusted his ruined suit jacket with fastidious care. "I think not." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small velvet box, the kind that held expensive jewelry. When he flipped it open, however, it revealed not a ring or watch, but a single yellowed photograph, a black and white image of a young Martha holding a newborn, her face radiant with joy. "Give this to Mother, will you?" He pressed it into Michael's hand just as another crash shook the house. Tell her I remembered." Then he turned and walked calmly into thickening smoke, disappearing down the hallway toward the heart of the blaze. The heat was unbearable now, the air unbreathable. Daniel half-dragged, half-carried Michael to window, where Sarah was ushering the last of the board members onto the wrought iron fire escape. The cold rain that had begun falling was the only thing that made the descent possible. Without it, the metal would have been too hot to touch. They regrouped on the lawn, a bedraggled collection of the wealthy and powerful now reduced to coughing, soot-streaked survivors. In the distance, sirens wailed, but Michael knew it was already too late for the house. And for David, the flames had reached the third story, licking hungrily at the eaves where generations of Wilkins' children had slept. Sarah collapsed at her knees beside him, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The files. Daniel patted his chest where the outline of the flash drive was still visible beneath his soaked shirt. Safe. But Michael wasn't listening. He was staring at the photograph David had given him, now slightly damp from the rain. On the back, in elegant script, was written a date, May 12, 1978, his birthday, and below that, 3 words that changed everything. "My beloved son." The house gave one final, shuddering groan before the roof collapsed inward, sending a fireball roaring into the night sky. Somewhere in that inferno, the last of the Wilkins family secrets were turning to ash, but the truth, Michael realized with sudden clarity, had never been in those walls to begin with. It had been in Martha's eyes when she took a bullet for him, in Lillian's rough hands teaching him to change oil, even in David's final act of unexpected mercy. As the first fire truck screeched into the driveway, their lights painting the scene in alternating flashes of red and white, Michael made a silent vow. The Wilkins legacy ended here tonight. What came next would be something entirely new. The safe house cabin smelled of pine resin and would smoke, the morning sunlight filtering through gauzy curtains to paint golden stripes across Martha's sleeping form. Michael stood in the doorway, watching the steady rise and fall of her chest beneath the quilt, the photograph David had given him burning a hole in his pocket. The doctors had warned him not to overtax her. The bullet wound combined with the stress of the past week had taken a severe toll, but she'd insisted on being brought here rather than hospital, as the proximity to the charred remains of the Wilkins estate could somehow help her make peace with everything that had happened. Behind him, the screen door creaked open, letting in a gust of crisp autumn air along with Daniel, who carried 2 steaming mugs of coffee. "She wake up yet?" he asked, keeping his voice low. Michael shook his head, accepting the mug. The warmth seeped into his hands, chasing away the lingering chill from hours spent watching the fire crews sift through the estate's ruins last night. "They found David's remains," he said quietly, "or what was left of them." Daniel grimaced, leaning against the porch railing. The morning light revealed bruises and cuts Michael hadn't noticed before, evidence of their harrowing escape. "Alvarez called me an hour ago. Preliminary ID on some of the bones in the basement." Michael's grip tightened on his mug. "Bones? Not from the fire," Daniel clarified. "Old. Very old. They think some might date back to the 40s. The implications settled between them like a physical weight. Arthur hadn't just buried secrets. He'd buried people. The coffee turned to acid in Michael's stomach. A rustling from inside signaled Martha was awake. By the time they reached her bedside, she'd already propped herself up against the headboard, her silver hair haloed by sunlight. She looked fragile in a way that had nothing to do with her injuries, as if learning the full scope of her father's crimes had hollowed her out from the inside. Michael hesitated before pulling the photograph from his pocket. "David wanted you to have this." Martha's breath hitched when she saw it. Her fingers trembled as they traced the image of her younger self, holding the baby she thought she'd lost forever. "He kept this all these years," she whispered. Then, noticing the date on the back, her face crumpled. "He knew. From the beginning, he knew you were my son." The pieces fell into place with sudden, terrible clarity. David's resentment, his relentless ambition, his need to prove himself the true Wilkins heir. He'd grown up knowing his place in the family was built on a lie. Daniel's phone buzzed, breaking the moment. He glanced at the screen, then stiffened. It's Alvarez. They found something in the ruins. The police station's conference room buzzed with tense energy when they arrived. Alvarez stood at the head of a long table littered with evidence bags, her usual crisp professionalism fraying at the edges. The bags contained mostly charred documents, but one held something that made Martha gasp. A small, fire-blackened jewelry box Michael recognized instantly. "We found in the study safe," Alvarez explained. The heat warped the metal, but the content survived. She flipped open the box to reveal a tarnished silver locket on a broken chain. Martha reached for it with shaking hands. "This was my mother's." She pressed a tiny clasp, and the locket sprang open to reveal 2 miniature photographs. One of young Arthur Wilkins, the other of a woman Michael didn't recognize. Alvarez cleared her throat. "That's not all." She produced a second evidence bag containing a single sheet of paper, remarkably well-preserved despite the fire. This was folded inside. Michael leaned closer. The document appeared to be a birth certificate for Lillian Marie Wilkins, born 1946. But what made his blood run cold was a handwritten notation in the margin. Subject A, Generation 3. Alvarez tapped another evidence bag. "We found dozens more like it. All female infants born into wealthy families between 1930 and 1980. All marked with generation numbers." Sarah, who'd been silent until now, made the connection first. It wasn't just about money. They were breeding something. The room swayed around Michael. All the pieces were there. The systematic taking of firstborn children, the meticulous records, the intergenerational timeline. Arthur hadn't just been preserving a legacy. He'd been engineering one. Martha's voice cut through the rising panic. "Where are the other children?" Alvarez's expression turned grim. "That's the problem. Most of the records burned." "But..." She hesitated, then slid a final evidence bag across the table. Inside was a fire-warped USB drive. This was in Arthur's personal safe. The texts say it's still readable. Michael met Martha's eyes across the table, seeing his own dawning horror reflected there. Whatever secrets that drive held, they would change everything again. But this time they would face them together. The police evidence lab was unnaturally cold, the sterile white walls amplifying hum of computer fans as the technician worked to recover data from the scorched USB drive. Martha sat stiffly in a plastic chair, the silver locket clutched in her palm like a holy relic. Michael could see the tension in her jaw, the same stubborn set she'd had when she took that bullet for him. The locket's hidden compartment had yielded one final secret. A tiny slip of paper with coordinates and the words Vault 7 written in her mother's elegant hand. The computer screen flickered to life suddenly, displaying a single folder labeled Legacy Project. The technician clicked it open, revealing hundreds of files neatly organized by generation. Alvarez leaned forward, her badge glinting under the fluorescent lights. What the hell? The first document was a genealogical chart so complex it made Michael's head spin. Color-coded lines connected names across decades, with meticulous notes on intelligence quotients, physical attributes, and, most chillingly, compatibility ratings. His own name appeared on Generation 4, linked to Lillian's with a red asterisk. Eugenics, Sarah breathed, her lawyer's mind already categorizing the legal implications. They weren't just stealing children. They were breeding a master race. Martha made a sound like a wounded animal. When Michael reached for her hand, her skin was ice cold. "My mother," she tried to warn me. Her voice was barely audible. "The summer I got pregnant, she kept giving me books, Brave New World, The Handmaid's Tale. I thought she was just being literary." Alvarez opened another file, a video dated the night Jason died. The footage showed Arthur and a much younger David standing over Jason's hospital bed. Arthur's voice was crisp and clear. "The merger requires Martha's shares. You know what to do." As the camera panned to the four bag, Michael realized with horror that David hadn't just allowed Jason die. He'd actively participated, but it was a final file that changed everything. A digital copy of Martha's original birth certificate, except the name listed wasn't Martha Wilkins. It read asterisk subject E7 Generation 2. Asterisk the parents' names have been redacted, replaced by barcode stickers. Martha swayed in her seat. I'm not even their real daughter." The technician pulled up another document, a transaction record showing Arthur's father had acquired 6 female infants in 1948 from something called the nursery. Michael's stomach roiled. The implications were staggering. Martha had been part of the program too, likely chosen to bear the next generation of ideal offspring. Her entire life, her very identity, was a carefully constructed lie. Alvarez's phone rang. She listened for a moment, then went pale. The coordinates in the locket. SWAT just raided the location. It's some kind of breeding facility. Still operational. The room spun around Michael. This wasn't just about the past. It was still happening. Right now. Martha stood abruptly, her forestand clattering to the floor. For a woman who just learned her entire life was a fabrication, her voice was remarkably steady. Then we finished this. As they rushed toward the exit, Michael realized the truth didn't matter anymore. Biology be damned. Martha was his mother in every way that counted. And together, they'd burned this nightmare to ground.